Hello, I'm Dwayne, and today we're reviewing my artifact for CS 499, the Whispering Woods Pie text adventure game I created for IT 140 Introduction to Scripting. This game is a text-based adventure where players assume the role of Sprout, a young hero who has been tasked with restoring the balance to the Whispering Woods. The forest has fallen under the shadow of Darkroot, an evil treant corrupted by dark magic. Sprout Player must explore multiple unique areas of the forest, gather six powerful items, and ultimately face Darkroot to save the forest. Currently, the game runs entirely on console. As you can see in the lower left corner, or lower corner here, apologize, that I have the Python file running, and this is what you would normally see. Would give you a welcome message and everything like that is defined by the show instructions. So the player would be able to, learn the controls of the game. It tells them that they have to collect the six items. You move to a new room by typing north, south, east, west, and add inventories through to his backpack through a command get, and then the item names itself. So you have a starting area. The current room equals Whispering Grove, and your inventory is none. And you find the same thing down here in your terminal when you run the game. You find yourself in the Whispering Grove, your backpack has nothing in its inventory. You look around, you can't see any items of power, so it asks you what to do next. The available directions: you can move, you find yourself able to move north, east, west, and south. So enter command for Sprout to follow, excuse me, a direction to travel, or get an item name. You don't see any items of power, so you know you don't need to get an item, but you can move north, east, west, or south. So we'll say we want to move north. Um, And then we find ourselves in the murky path. Still nothing in our backpack, but an item of power is glowing in our presence, a cloak. Do we dare approach it? So from the directions, we know we have to get the items of power and everything like this, and then face Darkroot to be able to defeat him. So we want to get cloak, and we notice that the cloak has been added to our backpack, and we look around and we can see no more items of power, so it asks what we can do next. And the player is able to continue this and continue this, moving through the map that they have here. Um, the game currently runs in console, relying on typed commands for movement and item collections. While it's functional, the plan is to enhance this game by converting it to a web-based interactive experience using visual elements, interactive controls, and persistent game states. I do want to make it more into a game engine that's able to run this game so that an admin is able to create more games based off of a map styled environment, but that may be later to come. Throughout the screencast, I review the current artifact block by block, describing what each part does, and then explain plan enhancements from the web version. These enhancements are designed to preserve the core gameplay of my original Whispering Woods Python script while improving the accessibility, engagement, and visual clarity. So I guess we'll start with the game instructions. You see that here in the original code as defined in the definition show instructions. It displays a welcome screen introducing the player to the game. So it has the comments for that. It shows that it's the function to display the game instructions. This was one of the first Python files that I have ever created back in the beginning of my college program here at SNHU. We have the show instructions functions. Its purpose is to provide the player with the guidance on how to play the game. It prints a welcome message introducing the players to Sprout and explaining the objective of gathering all six items of power and providing instructions for moving and collecting items. So it tells you how to, type a command northeast, southwest. You're able to move, add items for Sprout's backpack by typing get and then the item's name, as you see down here, like we did With the cloak, we typed get cloak, um, and put the cloak into our backpack. So it asked us if we wanted to approach the item. We typed get cloak right here. And then we received the item of power and placed it in our backpack cloak. That added it to our inventory in our backpack, and then told us that we were still in the murky path. And we look around, we can't see more items of power. It shows the inventory. I want to upgrade this by showing the inventory as a graphical icon instead of a text, making it easier to see at a glance what items Sprout is carrying. I want to highlight items in a current room using some form of visual effect. I will probably use maybe a toast or something to make this happen. So that way they can see that an item is in the room and they'll be able to use a button interactively to be able to pick up that item. It provides an alert message with styling rather than a simple console text when entering a specific area or encountering a warning. Again, I'll probably use something like a toast for that instead of, something saying, you know, uh, you know, you recited an item in your backpack. It'll probably be a toast. No such item exists in the room. I'll probably just make it so the button doesn't, display if there's no items available in the room. So that way we don't have to go anything about that, providing an extra layer of security, debugging, so to say, so that way if no item is present, they can't break the game by trying to pick up an item. Um, for example, if Sprouts in the Moonlight Clearing, right? Let's see where we got right here. The Druidic Staff, right? Um, and he doesn't have all the items. It'll flash a warning on the panel. It'll say something about the urgency of the situation. Here we said, oh, oh, you hear a loud boom, boom, boom coming from the north. Do you dare continue? Because in this instance, if you move to the room in the north, the Shadow Hollow, I believe, there's also no item in it. You start in the Whispering Grove and you end in the Shadow Hollow, and that's where Darkroot resides. So if the current room equals Shadow Hollow, and your inventory equals 6, which means that you've gathered all the items throughout the game, then the player is able to win the game, so on and so forth. So it'll make it something similar to that. Again, probably in a toast where you hear a loud boom, boom, boom coming. Do you dare continue? Not directly informing the player that if they continue without all the items, they'll lose the game, but informing them in some form of manner that they might not want to go that way just yet. These enhancements will make the game more immersive, allowing players to understand the environment and their current status without reading through the lines of actual console output. Currently, this information is purely textual, which is sufficient for a console play, but for the web-based experience, we plan to display these instructions in a dedicated panel on the screen, include a visual icon or button for the movement directions. I'm currently building a compass of buttons and a map that you can interact on the map through a fog of war style map that doesn't directly display rooms unless they're neighboring, so on and so forth, and a compass style directional button that the users will be able to click on to progress to neighboring rooms. Provide interactive hints when the player enters a room on whether an item is there or if they're broaching a special event. Again, this goes back to, did you hear the loud boom, boom, boom coming from the north? I'll probably pop that up on a toast or pop up a toast that says that there's an item in the room if they meet specific conditions and they're able to collect that item. If the player enters a new area, a pop-up tooltip might highlight available exits. I think I want to take the compass and make it so it fades in and out the directional buttons so they can only click on the buttons that they're able to move in the direction of. And the same with the interactive map that I want to make. It will only show rooms in the directions that they're able to progress if they've visited the neighboring room to that room. These enhancements will make the instructions more intuitive, interactive, and visually engaging. The goal is to reduce friction in the gameplay and make it immediately clear how to explore the Whispering Woods. Excuse me. So this next block shows the status, displaying Sprout's current status, including the room they're in, the inventory, and any items that are present. It provides a contextual message, for example, warning a player in the moonlight clearing without all 6 items, signaling danger. Currently, all of this is printed in plain text in the web-based version. I plan to enhance this section by displaying the current room name prominently. I think I will display this right below the room on the visual map, and then probably in a panel off to the right of the map that'll describe the room and the room's name itself. We're going to show the inventory as a graphical icon because right now it just shows you in the backpack, hey, I picked up the cloak right here, and each room has, an item, a silver axe, a sunlight elixir, the cloak, the druidic staff, and the barkskin potion, and the ancient ruin. And as you progress through those rooms, like this one says it has a sunlight elixir, we can get the sunlight elixir. And now that sunlight elixir has been added to our backpack. Instead of doing this in a command line output, I will do this in a visual display. Again, probably in a panel off to the side of the map that allows the user to visually see that they've picked up an item and what they're carrying in their inventory. This enhancement will make the game more immersive, allowing the players to understand the environment and their current status without actually reading through lines of the console output. And then we're going to move on to room navigation and the game loop. So the navigation is kind of defined here in the main, so to say. It sets the room name, the directions that are available for that room, what is in the direction of that room. So if we go north from the Whispering Grove, we will be put into the Murky Path. And then we go into the Murky Path. If we go east, we'll be put into the Hidden Vale. South, we would go back into the Whispering Grove. And then while we're in the Murky Path, of course, we'll be able to collect the item, the cloak. When say we go back to the Whispering Grove, it already had no items, so we wouldn't have an item to gain anyways. But say we went, east into the Hidden Vale, then we would pop up and it'd say that we see the sunlight elixir, and we'd be able to gain that sunlight elixir like we did down here. It's the heart of the game, the main function where the game loop resides. The player interacts and where the player interacts with Whispering Woods. The room's dictionary is to find each room's its exits, any items if they're present. There's a few rooms that have none here. Sprout starts in the Whispering Grove with an empty inventory, as we can see right here. During each loop of iteration, the current status is displayed using the show status. If we pick up an item, you see the item, or if there's no such item, so get item, there's no such item in this room. Sprout looks around and asks, are you sure such an item exists in this room? Asking her what he should do next. And that's what we're doing here. You know, um, we hit while in the current room, inventory and rooms. It shows the status of each one of these. Available exits are listed. It prints the available directions that we're able to do by joining the available exits, and the player types command to move. You know, in available exits, current rooms equal rooms in the command, unless you're in the Shadow Hollow. The game updates Sprout's position and inventory in the main room state. So as we do all this and we get everything, we get the item and everything like that. You find yourself in this. If an item moves in the current room and the current room has an item and the room's current room item, we have lower, so that way you don't have to type. You can uppercase, lowercase, as long as you type the item's name. And again, this enhancement where I do this visually instead of through code output is going to be a way to prevent the user from mistyping words when it's on the screen. It just makes it a little bit more of a hassle when they have to actually type that. Currently commands are typed manually, such as north or get the silver axe. For the web-based version, I plan to replace this with a clickable button for movement, representing rooms visually on a grid-styled map with the explored rooms revealed and the unexplored rooms hidden. Implementing a fog of war mechanic showing only rooms that Sprout has visited. I think I will make it so neighboring rooms are slightly visible, maybe not all the details though, so that way that they know visually that they're able to go in that direction, because I want to move away from this command line interface into a sheerly visible interface. Um, sorry. Um, I want to animate the player's movement between rooms for a more dynamic experience. Right now in the text, you just move from room to room and it reprints the output with, hey, you find yourself in this room. Hey, you find yourself in this room. I want to visually representate the travel between rooms. I will probably do some type of particle effect and some type of icon moving in between the rooms, so that way you can follow it and it's like a visual representation that Sprout's actually traveling from room to room. I want to update the room and inventory panels in real time so that the player immediately sees the effects of their actions. So when they pick up an item, it'll automatically be placed in the inventory panel that I'm going to create. And as soon as they visit a room, it'll become available on the map. If there's a neighboring room that they're able to see from that room, it'll become visible, so on and so forth until the entire map is filled out and they achieve victory or defeat conditions. Um, the item collection logic um, is kind of down in here. Um, check if the user's input command, for picking up item power, they're going to do get and then the item name itself. If the item's in the room, You receive the item of power and place it in your backpack. This adds it to your inventory. Else, no such item exists in the room, like we did down here. You got the sunlight elixir here. You received the item of power and placed it in your backpack. That added it to our backpack itself here. And then we tried to uh, get an item that doesn't exist. It says no such item existed in the room here. You know, um, the room dictionaries define which room, or sorry, um, the code checks if an item exists in the room, adds it to an inventory, and removes it from the room. If the player tries to collect an item that doesn't exist, they receive a message indicating that it's not there. So if it exists, we receive the item. If it does not exist, no such item exists. Are you sure? So on and so forth. In the web-based version, I plan to show the item in each room as a clickable icon. I will probably put a button that allows the user to pick up and interact with the item. Uh, Animate items moving from the room into the inventory panel. Again, I'll probably make this some sort of particle effect that takes an icon and moves it from the spot on the map over into the inventory panel. I want to update the inventory using a local storage, more than likely, to ensure persistence across each session. I know it's a short game, but we can take the same game and we can make it a much, much larger game. I plan to implement some form of feature that allows an admin to create multiple games with additional rooms and be able to drag and drop these around in a visual asset. That may or may not happen during the course of this project. It just depends on how much time that I have. And I want to provide a visual feedback if the player attempts to collect an invalid item, such as shaking the icon or flashing it in red. Um, I will probably just make it so that the button to pick up an item is not visible. So that way that they cannot pick up an item. So that way they can't attempt to collect an item that is invalid. Um, this approach will maintain the original functionality while enhancing clarity and interactivity. Players can immediately see the items they acquire and understand what actions are available in each room. You know, and then we move on to win and lose conditions of the game. So the win conditions are highlighted. Uh, let's see if current room equals the Shadow Hollow here. You know, if Sprout enters the Shadow Hollow with all 6 items, so if the current room equals Shadow Hollow and inventory equals 6, which means they have all of the items, right? Because there'll be 6 items in their inventory. Sorry, scrolling away here pretty fast. Then they defeat Darkroot and win. Here it prints, a whole little story, and then they gather around you and thank you, and then it says something about, the Elder's whisper of a threat druid named Black Branch and how he was connected to Darkroot to be continued. You know, hey, somebody can take this and the admin panel that I plan to create, maybe create, Black Branch's story if I don't get to that myself. You know, uh, by turning the, sorry, otherwise they lose. You know, um, Else you enter the Shadow Hollow without all 6 items. The Evil Tree and Darkroot defeat you, so on and so forth. Better luck next time. Would you like to play again? Yes or no? Replayability, right? So we put it in, play again equals yes. Else, thanks for playing. Come back to the Spring Woods. I need your help. You know, um, for the web version, enhancements I include to display a victory defeat message. This will probably happen in like a modal pop-up with a graphic or an animation. I want to try to animate some type of maybe combat sequence, not necessarily something super advanced, but maybe some swords going back and forth on the screen or something like this, just to show that a battle is taking place, provide buttons to restart or return to the main menu. I will probably implement a button that allows the player to restart the game at any time. And then it'll have, a question that pops up, uh, asking them if they're sure, just like it did here, play again, yes. If you would like to play again, yes, so on and so forth, everything like that. And then including dynamic updates for new rooms or items that may be added by the admin. Again, I want to maybe create an admin panel that allows them to create new rooms, items, enemies, the victory and defeat conditions for those enemies and stuff like that. By turning the text-based messages into visual interactive experiences, the players will have more satisfying sense of achievement and consequences. You know, um, the skills that were demonstrated throughout this, Whispering Woods is a fully functional text-based game here, right? Like you can run your console, you can play the game. If you get all the items, you win. It asks you if you want to replay. If you get to the Shadow Hollow and you don't have all of them, you get that you lose condition and it asks you if you want to play again, right? There's modular. See, like, hey, you know, play again, play again. This game, I rewrote a lot of things that I could have put into a function and just called that function there. I rewrote it twice here instead of doing that. We've progressed a long way since then, so being able to just modularize this code so that way it can call a function instead of rewriting code over and over and over, you know, that'll be a skill demonstrated that, just my coding functionality has come a long way. The the planned enhancements for the web version include a graphical room representation and a fog of war system, a clickable and animated item collection, a persistent inventory and player progress using local storage. Right now, it doesn't really save anything. If you leave the game, there's no starting off where you left. I want to create a persistent storage and probably use local storage to do that. So that way you can leave the game and come back. Again, not very useful for a game with, minimal rooms like this one has here, 8 rooms, right? But when we're able to add more rooms and everything like that, you may need to leave the game and come back to it. And then an admin panel for adding new rooms, items, or events dynamically, so that way the admin can actually go in through everything and enhance the game as they see fit. All these enhancements will demonstrate skills in JavaScript programming and DOM manipulation, front end and back end design for maintainable software, UI, UX design, and interactive web applications and data persistence, right? That manage or data persistence and management in a web environment, you know. So I think that'll meet all the conditions for this class, the pillars that we need to reach and everything like that. Converting this console game into a playable web application will allow me to showcase my actual professional quality in software design, modular programming, and interactive storytelling. You know, it aligns with my goals of becoming a full stack developer capable of building complete user friendly applications and everything like that. And it's a lot taking something, from a simple Python file like this that is a full game, while not very, you know, satisfying, I would say. It's a short game. It does function. It doesn't have any, inventory persistence or anything like that. You can come in here and add any room you want and make a bigger map and everything like that, add items to it, change the conditions for the boss, how many items do you want them to get, so on and so forth here. If the length of the inventory equals 6, That means they have all items because there's only 6 items right now, but maybe change that so it actually matches a specific list of items or something like that. And then visual representation, I plan to be able to do a visual way of representing that. But that being said, this wasn't a very long file to use as an artifact. It was pretty difficult to do when I had originally started this. Now it seems like it wouldn't be very hard to recreate this at all, and do it in a much better fashion, modularizing a lot of these things and not having to reprint things, just doing a new line, and stuff and things like that. So I don't have to write the same command 3 times and be able to do this, calling functions that way, when we do things like here, play again, I could have made that a function instead of, it calls it up here and I recreate it again down here. It could call it in both places and not have to do that. But, as we've progressed in our education, we've learned a lot of these things. When I started, I was really proud of this program. Now it's looking back on it, oh, there's a lot of mistakes here, and I could have, better commented anything. I did comment what some of the things do, but I didn't comment like, what's going on here, like say, uh, you know, checked player has all 6 items. Back then I wouldn't have known that I was actually doing the length of inventory was equal to 6. Yeah, now a lot of it makes sense. I may have gone through and recommented this a little bit throughout my education because this is something that was interesting to me, and it's why I chose it as my artifact file because I will be able to show database coding and everything, modular design and functionality throughout this, and actually show the true growth of what we've done here in our education during SNHU. Um, I hope this hasn't been too much of a run on or anything like that. If you have any comments or concerns, I would love to know. But I think everything that I want to do as far as my enhancements will show the skills demonstrated that we've gained over the course of our education here. I appreciate it and look forward to